When we last left Clifton Branham, he had left home at 12 years old and had worked for himself until he was 16 years old. He returned to visit his family members on Cumberland Mountain in Pound, Virginia. While he was there, he went to work for Martha Robinson Branham for a month. There, he met Nancy Branham, his first cousin, and eloped with her. They lived together 8 years of happiness in their union, and had 4 children, 3 of whom were still living. This all would soon change, however, as Clifton would make choices that would lead to the gallows. Just as a reminder, Cumberland Mountains is an old name for Pine Mountain on Kentucky-Virginia state line. This name was changed at a later time in history. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Moonshining. There came a time after the 8 years were over that Clifton, along with 2 other parties, began moonshining to make money. He does not name either party, but states at the time of his writings that one was living on the south side of the Cumberland Mountain and the other was dead. The trio did very well with their endeavors until they started to become afraid of the revenue officers. So they moved their operation to the head of the Kentucky River just above Mart Venter's home. They would make large quantities of shine. To do that, they would cut down a large chestnut tree to make their tubs with. The location was perfect to set up their steel. They would often go down to the house to play the violin, pick the banjo, and have a great time dancing. They thought that they were having a wonderful time, but soon this would all end. Rant Smallwood. In our Outlaw series, we do have a story about the life of Clell Adams. It can be found on our video titled The Deadliest Deputy in Letcher County. The link is posted down below. According to the memoir by Clifton Branham, Clell was married to the stepdaughter of Mr. Venters. His brother-in-law was Rant or Rand Smallwood. We currently do not have her name or the date of their marriage, or if they had children. Rant killed Clell for $100 and an improved .38 Smith & Wesson pistol. Rant was a friend and old schoolmate of Branham. Smallwood and Branham had gotten on very well until he tried to kill Francisci, who was a friend of Branham. Another friend of Branham stated that, quote, "It would be a good thing if someone would kill Rant Smallwood," unquote. Being young and easily led astray, Branham decided to kill Smallwood himself. He went to Mark Vanover's house to get a gun, but a lady asked him what he wanted to do with the gun. When Clifton told her that he wanted to kill Smallwood with it, she took back the gun and said, quote, "Clifton, don't do that," unquote. So, unable to get the gun, Clifton took his Spencer rifle and a .44 caliber cap and ball Remington instead. Leaving the steel, Branham took to the brush and went to Blaze Branch and stayed all night with Wes Sowers. The next morning Clifton went by the woods to Dorton, Kentucky. There he found Rant working on a church house. Clifton concealed himself for a while, but could see no opportunity to shoot Rant. So he went back to the woods, crossing Shelby Creek, and went up to Dorton on top of the opposite hill. While spying on the men working on the church, there was still not an opportunity to shoot Rant. While he was watching the men work, a Fleming boy who was dodging the sheriff came to where he was. Clifton told him to send Rant a message to come to him. Rant sent a message back telling him to come with him. So Clifton went with Rant to his home to stay the night. The next day, Rant and Clifton went squirrel hunting twice. But there was still no opportunity to kill Rant that day. Rant tells Clifton about a dream he had. He said, quote, "Dreamed that a large snake got on him, and that he could not get it off," unquote. Clifton knew that the snake in the dream was him. That afternoon they decided to go to Wes Sowers' home to see his girls. They cleaned and oiled their guns before they headed out. Clifton knew that Rant had been watching him during their entire journey. When Clifton fell a step behind Rant, he said, quote, "Clifton, walk up to my side, for I believe you want to shoot me," unquote. To calm his nerves, Clifton told him that he was being foolish for thinking that way. Then Rant asked Clifton if someone was trying to shoot him in an ambush, what would Clifton do? Clifton replied that he would shoot as many of them as he could. The time came when they arrived at Mr. Soward's home, and soon after supper the old folks turned in and went to bed. Only the girls, Smallwood, and Branham were alone in the kitchen talking. Along about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, Clifton said that he had to go, and he got up and went outside. He then walked around, and he found a hole in the side of the house big enough for his gun muzzle. Smallwood was sitting just opposite of the hole in a chair leaned up against the wall. Clifton lined up the muzzle of his gun and shot Rant in the stomach. Rant stood up, fell face first, and said, quote, "Clifton Branham has killed me," unquote. Life on the run. Clifton left that same night and went to the head of Kentucky River to lay low. The news came to the post office the next day that someone had shot Smallwood and he was just alive. Clifton stayed there for a little while, and then he moved on to Pound, Virginia. He traveled to Pound by crossing the Cumberland Mountain at Horse Gap and came off at Elf Sower's Mill, just above Donkey. There he was once again told that Smallwood was shot and that he was being accused of the deed. Clifton denied that he had anything to do with it and claimed that his friends were looking out for him. Just as a precaution, Clifton went to the store and bought some powder, caps, lead, and filled his pockets full of bullets. And then he traveled to Granville Cox's home. Cox was his brother-in-law. Branham stayed with him for a couple of days. Clifton then traveled to Mr. Looney's home on Slate Creek in Buchanan County, Virginia. He spent a few days with Mr. Looney, and then word came that Branham had shot a man in Kentucky and was getting away. Looney asked for Clifton to stay with him a bit longer, but he left his house the next day. Branham traveled to Mr. Rife's home in McDowell County, West Virginia, and stayed with him until after Christmas with Mr. Mullins. Mr. Mullins was a clever moonshiner. After Christmas, Clifton was on the move again and went to Indian Creek in Tazewell County, Virginia. There he worked for a while for a Mr. Lambert, and he worked for a Mr. Moore. Other women. While on his travels, he used the name of George Jones and claimed that he was a single man. He claims to have fallen in love with a great many girls, widows, and married women. One of the married women had fallen in love with him and offered to have her husband put away, and she would give him all that she had if he would only stay with her. She had enough money to keep them both for the rest of their lives. It was during this time that Granville Cox came to Tazewell after Clifton, and together they returned home. Rant Smallwood was almost completely healed from his wounds. Clifton and his wife would go to John Branham's home for the next 2 months to live. What will happen next will put a permanent rift between Clifton and Nan, and will send Clifton to prison for the next 14 years of his life. We will leave the story of Clifton Branham at this place in his story. In the last episode, we will see the last confession of Clifton and the crime that he will commit that will lead him to the gallows. Thank you. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.